Hey guys, less is more back with another video. I know I've been away for a while. I've gone through some pretty significant life changes recently. I just moved out to Las Vegas a couple weeks ago. I just moved out of Texas um, and just moved out here for uh, work related reasons, but finally got all settled in, back on the grind. So figured it was time to put a new video out. So today we're going to be diving into a bit more technical content. So what I'm going to be covering today is indifference, expectation, Nash equilibrium, and a few metrics coined by Zenith, Alpha, and Omega. So let's hop right into it. So let's start with indifference. So say you have a game where you have two different strategical options. All indifference means is that you are indifferent, as you might have guessed, between the two strategies. So all this means is that, let's see here, the expectation of, say, strategy A is equal to the expectation of strategy B. Now, yeah, I think we can all agree as to what expectation means. All this means is how much, say in poker, your expectation is just how much your strategy yields on average. And then, so moving on to Nash equilibrium. So a Nash equilibrium is unique in the sense that this describes a game where all players involved know each other's strategies. So, say in a game of Heads Up No Limit, for instance, this would be not knowing the other player's hole cards, but knowing what they would do with every holding. So a Nash equilibrium is simply where both players know exactly what the other player is doing with every holding. But the equilibrium part comes into play where neither player can exploit the other or implement a counter strategy such that it increases their expectation. And a Nash equilibrium attempts to minimize the increase in EV of an opponent's counter strategy, or basically this is just fancy talk for it's a strategy that can't be exploited, right? So moving on to alpha and omega. Alpha is simply the optimal folding frequency for the player facing a bet, and then omega is the pot odds laid to the player facing a bet. Okay, now we're going to discuss a toy game that demonstrates a few scenarios related to Nash equilibriums and how playing a balanced or unbalanced strategy can open you up to getting exploited or help you avoid being exploited. So in this game, there are two players, Oscar and India. Both players hold exactly one card. Oscar, the out of position player, holds exactly a king, and India holds either an ace or a queen. India is equally distributed between an ace or a queen. The pot size is 100 and the stack is 100. Oscar is pacified, meaning he cannot bet or raise. All he can do is check or call India's bet. This is a one street game, so in this scenario, India, the action is on India, and she has a decision. Okay, so we're going to take a look at a scenario in which Oscar maximally exploits India for her tendencies. So in this scenario, we're going to take a look at two scenarios. The first one, India never bluffs. We're going to take a look at the scenario in which India always bluffs. But we're going to take a look at both of these and demonstrate how Oscar can minimize India's expectation. So in this first scenario, we're just going to take a look at India's expectation with either of her holdings. So in this, we're just going to calculate the expectation for India's ace. Now in this scenario, India never bluffs, so Oscar should just never call. And so it's impossible to make the nuts indifferent between betting and checking in position here without some sort of rake structure. So in this scenario, the ace is always going to bet and Oscar is always going to fold. So the ace is just going to take down the pot of 100. And then when India has the queen, India never bluffs, so the queen is just going to check back and yield 0 from the pot. Now, if we're trying to calculate India's expectation, remember her holdings are equally distributed, so India's total expectation is just going to be the sum over all holdings. Let's see. So we're going to multiply the mass function by, let's see, the expectation for the given holding. And so what this is going to yield is, so it's just going to be 100 times 0.5 plus 0 times 0.5, which is equal to what, 50? Yeah. And then over here, in this scenario, India always bluffs, so India will be over bluffing. We'll discuss why this is in a minute, but if India always bluffs, Oscar is now no longer indifferent between calling and folding his bluff catcher, so he should just always call. So in this situation, the expectation for India's ace is just going to be 200, since India always takes down the pot plus the bet. And so the expectation for India's queen is going to be minus 100, since India always bluffs the queen and Oscar is always calling, so the queen is always going to lose India's entire stack here. And so here we're going to see, we're going to see a similar thing. So like India's expectation here is 200 times 0.5 plus minus 100 times 0.5. And so this gives us 100 minus 50, which is equal to 50. Okay, so now we're going to introduce omega. So, let's see, so omega is simply the size of the bet over, let's see, 2s plus p, if I recall correctly. So S is the bet size, and then P is the pot size. So in this game, if India bets all in, omega would be, let's see, so it's 100 over 200 plus 100, which is 1/3. Which you should recognize, a pot size bet lays pot odds of 1/3. So now we're going to take a look at, first let's discuss, okay, if you're being laid pot odds of 1/3, in simplest terms, you have to be good at least 1 out of every 3 times to make a profitable call. So to make the out-of-position player indifferent, India should have a range consisting of 1 bluff for... Basically, one third of India's range should be a bluff, right? So if India is equally distributed between an ace and a queen, India should be bluffing her queen exactly half the time to make Oscar indifferent between calling and folding. Okay, now in this scenario, we're going to take a look at a scenario where India is balanced, meaning India is going to bet all in for 100 into a pot of 100 and have a range that consists of exactly 1/3 bluffs, meaning imposition will bluff the queen exactly half the time and always go in with the ace. So in that scenario, there will be a quarter of a combo of queens and a full half a combo of the ace. So in this, we're just going to look at a couple scenarios and just demonstrate how no matter what Oscar does, it's impossible for him to minimize India's expectation. So we're still going to look at it from the perspective of India's holdings. So if Oscar always calls, the expectation for India's ace is going to be 200. And then the expectation for India's queen is going to be minus 50. And this is because in this scenario, India is bluffing and losing half the time. So half the time the queen is going to lose 100, and then the other half of the time, the queen will just be checking back and not yielding anything. And so here, India's expectation is going to be 200 times 0.5 plus minus 50 times 0.5, which is just 100 minus 25, which is 75. And then in this situation over here, Oscar always folds. So the expectation of India's ace is going to be 100. And then the expectation of India's queen, remember the queen is still bluffing only half the time. So half the time the queen is going to take down the pot of 100, and then the other half of the time the queen is just going to check back and lose. So the expectation of the queen here is 50. So here India's expectation is just 100 divided by 2 plus 50 divided by 2, which is just 50 plus 25, which is 75. So we can see, oh, that's a messy 5. We can see no matter how out of position reacts here, it's not possible to minimize imposition's expectation. So yeah, just something to consider. I think this is quite a cool concept. Yeah, and so we'll cover one last scenario here and introduce alpha. So now we're going to take a look at this from Oscar's point of view. And here I'm going to introduce alpha. So alpha is simply how often, it's basically the optimal folding frequency. So alpha is simply calculated by the size of the bet over the size of the bet plus the pot size. So in this scenario, So in this scenario, alpha is 100 over 200, which is just 1/2. So alpha for a pot size bet is always going to be 1/2. So Oscar, to make the imposition player indifferent between, say, if, just for example, never bluffing or always bluffing, to make the imposition player indifferent, the out of position player should fold at a frequency of 1/2. And since Oscar's entire range consists exactly of a king, Oscar should just fold his king at a frequency of 1/2 to make imposition indifferent. So we'll take a look at how this forces imposition to indifference here. So in this first scenario, if India never bluffs, we're going to take a look at the Oscar's expectation versus each of India's holdings. So we'll just denote this EV sub O of India facing so say India's holding is an ace. We'll just say this is Oscar's expectation against an ace. If India never bluffs, and Oscar is still calling at a frequency of exactly 50%, Oscar will call and lose half the time against an ace and lose 100, and then half the time he will fold and lose 0. So the expectation against India's ace is -50. And then Oscar's expectation against a queen. Now remember, India never bluffs. So when India has a queen, India will always check back and lose the entire pot to Oscar. So Oscar's expectation is just 100. So Oscar's expectation in this scenario is going to be -50 divided by 2 plus 100 divided by 2, which is just 25. Then over here, if India always bluffs, remember Oscar is still defending his king at exactly a frequency of 1/2. So the expectation of India's ace is still going to be -50. And then Oscar's expectation against India's queens, or India's queen, rather. So India's always going to be bluffing. So half the time, Oscar will call and win 200, the bet plus the pot size. And then half the time, the king will fold and win 0. So the average expectation is just going to be 100. So here, the expectations are going to work out exactly the same, right? So here in this scenario, Oscar's expectation is still going to be 25. So if Oscar simply defends his range at exactly alpha, imposition will be indifferent between, say, always bluffing or never bluffing, or really anything in between. So this is sort of how balance strategies work and how they can help you avoid becoming exploited. So these are just a few things to think about when bluff catching or betting into an opponent. Sort of think about what you're trying to do to your opponent. So here I just want to demonstrate in Pio a few more of these concepts with this toy game. So I'm just going to give Oscar kings, imposition, aces, and queens. Then just select a low brick run out that doesn't interact with either range. Starting pot 100, stack 100. Out of position is pacified. Imposition has 1 all-in size. And then we will take a look at the equilibrium strategy. So here, India will be bluffing queens exactly half the time, and Oscar will be defending kings exactly half the time. So now what I'm going to demonstrate is how overbluffing or underbluffing will affect either strategy. Say India slightly overbluffs this spot, say just by like 1%. Okay. Yeah. So Here, India is bluffing queens 1% more frequently than she should. So if we rerun this, let's take a look. We'll see kings is now pure calling instead of defending half the time. Now, what if... Let's reset the strategies here. Now, what if Oscar slightly overfolds or underfolds? Well, if Oscar, say Oscar slightly overcalls, say by 1%. Yep, that's right. We rerun this. Now we will see queens is just pure checking back. Because queens is no longer indifferent between bluffing and checking back, since Oscar will be over defending. So even these slight differences in frequencies will yield quite a different result. So the main takeaway is at equilibrium, both players are implementing a mini-max strategy. So there's nothing either player can do to minimize the other player's counter strategy, and therefore both players are insusceptible to exploitation. Whereas if either player is over bluffing, under bluffing, or if Oscar's overfolding or underfolding, the strategies change quite drastically. So like if Oscar's just slightly overcalling, India will just never bluff. So yeah, the takeaway is like at equilibrium, if you know your opponent is just slightly under bluffing, that doesn't mean your bluff catchers should just bluff catch slightly less frequently. It means most of your bluff catchers are now not indifferent between bluff catching and folding. And same goes for the player that's betting. If your opponent slightly overcalls or if the other player facing the bet slightly overfolds or underfolds, your bluffs are no longer indifferent and should just do one or the other. So that's more or less what I wanted to demonstrate here. Let me know what you guys think about the video. Thanks.